Hi, I'm Ben East, a Foreign Service officer, AFSA member, and author. I'm glad to be here again today to continue supporting AFSA's efforts to promote Foreign Service books and writers. To that end, we have Brian Neely, a photographer, who is going to tell us a little bit about his book, A Wine-Filled Year. He'll take us into the cellars and the tasting rooms and all throughout the vineyards of Hungary. Brian, you're from Seattle. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, as he said, I'm from Seattle, and he had asked me. Ben had asked me before how I ended up in D.C. My wife and I met as students in St. Petersburg, and we moved back to Seattle after college. And while she was working in the tech industry, she got to know Maria Cantwell, who became one of the senators from Washington State. And when she got tired of working in tech, she said, "Hey, let's see if the Senate is an enjoyable place to work." So we moved out here, and she found pretty quickly that working in politics is not her cup of tea. And so she began the process of applying for the Foreign Service. And because I like to travel and not do very much, I make an outstanding EFM. And so I get to travel around and drive around Hungary taking pictures of winemaking. Or we served in Afghanistan for 2 years, where I was a cultural affairs assistant, and I got to put on art shows and writers' symposia and rock concerts. And in Greece, I was the embassy's photographer, so I got to chase senators around the Acropolis. And in Kazakhstan, I worked for OBO.
That's the Overseas Building and Operations.
Yes. Oh,
Right.
yes.
Right.
OBO, the Overseas Building Operations Group. They were building a new embassy. And so now here we are.
Great. All right. Can't wait to hear more about your book. I understand you're going to take us on a tour through Hungary. We'll pull up the map and we'll have a look.
Yes. Okay.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay, so this is Hungary. It's about 35,000 square miles, which puts it around the size of Indiana. So it's not a very large country. From Budapest, which is mostly in the north, down to the Croatian-Serbian border is only about a 2-hour drive. And from east to west, the entire country is about 5 hours to drive. The Hungarians say that they have 22 wine regions in their tiny country. I kind of disagree with that, but they're measuring very small microclimates. So, for example, they have Balaton, which is the largest lake in Europe, and hot, dry winds come out of the west, and they hit Balaton, and they cool down a little bit, and they get a little bit wetter, and so it changes the climate from here to here. And so they view this as two radically different climates, even though on the map it looks pretty similar. For my book, I focused on, I think, 5 or 6, maybe 8 different places. There are wineries right around Budapest, but I didn't visit those. I wanted to go further afield. So I went all the way to the extreme west to Sopron, which is right on the Austrian border, about 45 minutes from Vienna, and visited a winery there that I liked very much. I went to right here on the south side of Lake Balaton at Balaton Lele. There's a small winery that's probably the best winery I've ever been to in the world. They make a beautiful Bordeaux-style wine that the owner names for his grandmother. It's called Loliense, and his grandmother's nickname was Loli. So that's where he came up with the name for that. I also went down around Pécs. There's a small village called Vilán that has a great many beautiful wines, mostly reds, but they do a few whites. If you've had a Hungarian wine, there's a good chance it came from Vilán, and it's down here. It's very hot and dry down there, so they have long, dry summers that are perfect for growing grapes. And then coming up here to the northeast, there's the town of Eger, and that is one that you've almost definitely heard of. If you've heard of the Hungarian wine Bull's Blood, that comes from Eger. Um, and that is it's a specific blend of one Hungarian grape and three more commonly known grapes. It uses Kadarka, which is a Hungarian grape, and Cake Francosch, which is called Blaufränkisch in Austria, and Lumburger in the rest of the world, and some Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc. And it's just this rich, dark red wine. The Turks called it bull's blood because the Hungarian men would drink it and they'd come out for battle with wine basically pouring off of their beards, looking like they just got done drinking from a bull. And so it kind of scared the Turks a little bit. And then all the way over in the east, if I can, it's not on this map, somewhere out here is the village of Tokai, and that's one that you've almost definitely heard of. They produce sweet wines there that are very similar to French Sauterne. So they grow their grapes normally, and some of them get moldy with a mold called Cinerea, Botrytis cinerea, or botrytized, as they call it in the wine industry, or noble rot. And so they take these moldy grapes and they throw them in a bin and they turn into a paste, and then they pour some wine over the paste and they let that ferment for a while, and they get this ridiculous, beautiful sweet wine that tastes like flowers and fruit. And it ages, it has such a high sugar content that it ages extremely well for a white wine. And I've tasted one from 1956 that blew my mind. It was like having a glass of fruited caramel or something like that. It was absolutely beautiful. Then also, some of the wineries were down here in Sexard, which is also the home of, if you like a really challenging half marathon, they have the Wine Country Half Marathon that is actually 14 and a half miles rather than 13 miles, and it is harder than running a marathon. I know this because I've done both. And you run straight up a hill and then straight down a hill and then straight up a hill and then straight down a hill for 14 miles. And then at some of the aid stations, you can get a glass of wine, or you can get a glass of Palinka, which is the Hungarian version of grappa, which is, it's a beautiful beverage, but I don't recommend it for when you're running a race. Let's see. So that kind of covers most of the places I went in Hungary. There was one up here, Pannonhalma. There's a monastery that had a winery, and during the Soviet period they were allowed to continue making their own wine. So it's one of the few places in Hungary that was allowed to continue making good wine for the 70 years of Soviet occupation, or 50 years of Soviet occupation. So their wines are really well developed and quite lovely. And that I think covers my map of Hungary. So I've been asked to talk about some of the pictures from the book, and I'll start with this picture, which is also the cover of the book, and it's also the inspiration for the book. I was at a wine tasting with some friends of mine, and the winemaker was pouring the wine for us, and I got right in there with my camera and took this close up, and I wasn't sure if it was going to work or not. And a few days later, I was back home working on the pictures, and I kept coming back to this picture, and I shot, I don't know, 5 or 6 right in a row, but this one had the best splash in the glass and the best highlights in the background and such. And I kept smiling as I looked at this picture. And then while I was working on it, I thought I might as well have some wine. So I poured myself a glass of wine, and I'm drinking my glass of wine, looking at this picture and thinking, I want to do this. I want to spend all my time drinking wine and talking to people about wine and taking pictures of wine. What can I do? And I was like, I'll write a book. And I will drive around Hungary. I'll call it wine for a year. And I thought that was a brilliant idea for a while. And uh, and worked with that and just kept this picture in mind and this feeling in mind of being outside on a hot summer evening, talking to winemakers, enjoying a glass of wine. I ended up changing the title to A Wine-Filled Year, which was actually based on a conversation with my Hungarian teacher. As we were working on what to call the book in Hungarian, she suggested Borral Töltölt Év, which means wine-filled year, and it carries the aspect of filling a glass of wine. It uses the same structure that you would use to say, I'm filling a wine glass. And so it's like filling your year with wine, but also kind of, exploring wine. So that's how I ended up with A Wine-Filled Year. And so this is the cover of the book and still my favorite picture from the book. And now I'm going to show you another picture. This one is it's a bottle of wine in a cellar. The cellar is one of my favorite cellars in Hungary because it's filled with all these rows of lights behind and under the wine bottles, so that it turns the wine bottles into these bright lamps. And the only light in this picture is the one lamp that's directly under the bottle. And I love the way that it starts out bright yellow at the bottom and then sort of turns dark red, but around it it stays yellow and gets a little bit reddish toward the top. And it just it with the spider webs and such, it feels old, and yet it's really creative, and the winemaker really, he likes having fun with his wine. And the one of his best wines is called Chateauby, which is Hungarian for yada yada yada, but it's also the name of his dog, and so it's this multi-layered name for a really delightful, easy drinking dessert wine. So yeah, that's inside a Hungarian cellar. And then finally, I think this is one of the best landscape pictures I've ever taken. This is from a hill in eastern Hungary in the Tokaj region. The town that's just below it over here is called Mad, and the hill is Mad Hill. And the people I know who grew up in this region love this picture. They say this is what home feels like, and they just really love the way I captured the look and the feel of their area. It's late October. Harvest is just about done. The last gold leaves are still on the trees and on the vines. And in about a week, everything's going to turn brown and fall off the vines, and it'll start raining and snowing. But you get this one last explosion of heat and light right at the end of the year. And this picture never fails to make me happy. So and this is the last picture in the book.
Brian, thank you for taking us around Hungary and through some of your photographs. I think what you've left off the table so far, though, is the text that's in the book. I certainly enjoyed reading what I read of it, the evolution of your idea, why you created the project. It occurs to me as you explain it that enjoying the wine and going around the country is not simply about a trip through Hungary, but it's a trip back in time as you open up different vintages and you taste different years that came to fruition. But I think maybe a good example of some of your beautiful writing, your descriptions of the tastes and the flavors of the wine, which came clear in your lecture, are also there on the printed page. So maybe you could read that passage we talked about from the beginning of your book,
Okay.
and let the people hear how it sounds.
Okay. So this is from the introduction, um, and it's towards the end of the introduction. The wineries I've visited have ranged from very small, with just enough production to supply local demand, up to a couple large or old enough to be known by cognoscenti outside Hungary. I have drunk rosés that sparkle in the mouth with a taste of strawberries, reds that are as rich and lush as a deep gravy, whites that dance on a line between fruity and dry, and the sweet, sweet ossus that explode with fruit on your tongue.
Yeah, it's very nice. Thank you. So I was curious to know how you've spread the word about this book and had other folks find out about it. Can you tell me about that?
Mostly, it's been word of mouth by telling people, telling people. When I first launched it, I offered a 20% off sale if you pre-purchased it, 20% off and no shipping in Hungary or the U.S. because I was still living in Hungary at the time. Um, and also I tweeted about it pretty regularly, and on my blog I talked about pictures from the book pretty frequently, um, and a lot of people bought copies to give somebody else,
Right.
which I liked quite a bit.
Yeah. Did you have a chance to present copies at the various vineyards that you visited or at different wine tasting events?
I did. I gave all the wineries that are featured in the book a copy of the book. Um, there are a couple of wine shops in Hungary that have a few books for sale. And there's the publisher I worked with, whose name is Fekete Sas, which means Black Eagle. They do beautiful art books and poetry books. They have about a third of the run that they're selling at book fairs and such in Hungary.
Okay, great. Which brings to mind this other idea. The book is completely bilingual. It's entirely translated into Hungarian, so it's useful on both
Hmm.
sides of the Atlantic. But this isn't your first book either, is it? You've had other book projects in the past. You want to tell us a little bit about those?
Well, this is definitely my most ambitious book project. Um, as I said earlier, one of the tours that my wife and I had was in Afghanistan, and uh, while there, I worked partly as one of the embassy's photographers, and and got to go all over the country, and in addition to work pictures of the ambassador meeting with a tribal elder or something like that, I got to take pictures of dusty street scenes,
Right.
or you know, things like that. And so I put together two books that I sell through blurb.com called Afghanistan and creatively Afghanistan 2.
Huh.
And some of it has some we RSO would let us get on the roof of the embassy
Hmm.
sometimes and take pictures, and just sort of look out at this city that we couldn't actually go to, and so I have some pictures from those shoots there, and then several years ago I did my portfolios as books,
Okay.
and so I did still lifes and flowers, and a travel book,
Right.
and I don't remember now, pretty sure. I also did a safari in the Serengeti
That's right. I've seen
as a
those.
small book
Yeah.
through blurb.com. I'm not sure how you would find those books now, but I guess you could go to Blurb and do Serengeti Brian Neely as a search and see
Yeah.
if it's still there.
Right. Good. I've seen the photos. They're quite good. So that does make me wonder how you got into photography. What drew you to?
I, on a whim, I bought a Pentax K1000, sort of entry level SLR back in the film days.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Basically, on my way out the door going to Russia.
Huh.
Because I thought, you know what, I'm going to be spending a year in Russia. I should have a camera. And this was, 20 years before the smartphone was invented. So, you didn't have a camera to carry around in your pocket. And I figured if I'm going to shoot, I don't want to point and shoot. I want, a good camera. And started doing that and realized that I absolutely loved it as a mode of expression. I'm a fairly creative person, but I am terrible with drawing. I cannot draw. I can't sculpt. Um, I sometimes write poetry. I sometimes start novels. I've started a lot of novels, um, but
We'll have to have you back and talk about it.
no, we won't talk about the novels. They're terrible. Um, but uh, but with photography, I can express what I see in the world. The way I look at it is that when I take a picture, you're not seeing the world as it is. You're seeing what I saw, and it's really, with this picture, for example, the scene isn't nearly this yellow. The scene isn't nearly this soft and hazy looking. I shot it with a bad lens, and then I increased the saturation on the yellow, and sort of increased the softness of the picture to get the look of a painting with it. But it's still, if you look closely, it's very clearly a photograph, and so I can express so many different things, so many different ways with a camera, and it's something that I've done in the background for 25 years now.
All right. So aside from novels that you're going to dustbin, what's next for you? What other book projects do you have in mind?
My wife's family lives in Hanover, Pennsylvania, which is straight north of here, basically, and we live in Silver Spring, so we take 97 straight up to Pennsylvania. I promise you, I'm going somewhere with this. About 45 minutes into our drive, we cross New Hampshire Avenue, way up in rural Maryland. And we park down at the Kennedy Center garage, and so we drive across the beginning of New Hampshire Avenue 5 days a week. And what I'd like to do is a project that goes from end to end of New Hampshire Avenue.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's going to be pictures and interviews,
Right.
or just pictures.
Yeah.
But just stop and meet some of the people along the way who
Right.
live and work along New Hampshire Avenue.
You'll have to hit some coffee shops. I know you've got a.
Yes.
What were you, coffee maker, coffee?
But just before we joined State Department, I worked at Starbucks as a manager, and it was and frankly is the best job I've ever had. My job was to make coffee and talk to people. And that's when I was a barista and a shift supervisor. And then as I became a manager, my job was to teach people how to make coffee and talk to people. And I've maintained that passion for coffee. Everywhere I go, I buy the localest coffee I can get. When I was in Bali, I went and I had the cat poop coffee, which is beautiful if you like rich, earthy coffees, and recognize that through the roasting process, anything that the cat left on the coffee is gone. But in Vietnam, of course, I get the ridiculously sweet iced coffee. In France, I get a nice cafe au lait. In Turkey, Greece, Arabia, I get a Turkish, Greek, Arabian coffee, depending on where you are. Of course, in Italy, it's espresso, nothing but espresso.
That's right.
And
So I guess you've got your New Hampshire book laid out for you, and maybe you'll get some coffee in there. Maybe you won't. Maybe that's a whole other book unto itself. But
could be.
I look forward to hearing how the interviews turn out too. I'm sure that'll be interesting. You're an engaging guy. It's a great book, some great photography in there. Any last thoughts you have?
Not really. Buy the book. And also the pictures, they're for sale as well. But otherwise, no. One thought: explore the world. Wherever you go, there you are, and you take yourself with you. If you're unhappy in Washington, you're probably going to be unhappy drinking a glass of wine in Hungary, unless it's because your life is really terrible in Washington and you go to Hungary to escape that. But in general, we take ourselves with us, and we can choose to be happy, and we can choose to have fun. And the best thing about the Foreign Service life is the foreign part. And just going out and driving out 3 hours from Budapest to find this one magical hill, or or driving to a Greek island where nobody speaks English. And well, you take the ferry because you can't drive across the water. But but going to a Greek island where nobody speaks English, and you get to see the cave where the Venus de Milo came from, or in Kazakhstan, driving out across the open land and just looking at this incredible empty landscape that has its own beauty, and you know, find yourself where you are and explore everything.
Great. Very inspiring. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
All right.